The story concludes with fresh regulations, novel warnings, and a prohibitively expensive lesson regarding the folly of engaging in fisticuffs with species hailing from perilous planets. It's safe to say no one at Six Station Academy anticipated the semester concluding with a comprehensive overhaul of the Interspecies Conduct Handbook. Yet here we are, all thanks to Vexthoran Salakite, that veritable monument to unearned self-assurance, who inexplicably decided to extend his manipulating appendage where it emphatically did not belong. For those unfamiliar with the institution, Galactic Station Academy is strategically positioned at the nexus of 17 principal trade routes, serving as the preeminent educational facility for the Galactic Council's most distinguished progeny. We're discussing the offspring of ambassadors, corporate titans, military commanders, and the occasional hereditary sovereign who, in the 34th century, still clings to the belief that titles hold significance. The tuition fees alone could sustain a modest colony for 3 years. The waiting list is more protracted than a Relnac's mating tentacle, and considerably less agreeable to navigate. The Academy prided itself on its diversity, boasting 63 species among its student body. It featured state-of-the-art environmental controls, capable of transitioning from methane-rich atmospheres to aquatic chambers in under 4 minutes, alongside cuisine sourced from across known space. Though the less said about the Glorian nutrient paste, the better. Everyone coexisted harmoniously, adhered to the regulations, and grasped the intricate social hierarchy that prevented hundreds of apex predators, hive minds, and silicon-based philosophers from transforming the dormitories into a combat zone. Then, the humans arrived. The cafeteria on Sub-Level 9, catering to oxygen breathers with carbon-based biology, invariably bustled during the third meal rotation. Vexthorn invariably held court at the central table, as was his custom. The Salakite species typically stood about 8 feet tall, built as if someone had deliberately stacked muscle upon bone, upon denser muscle, then encased the entire structure in a grey-blue hide, impervious to most small arms fire. Their home world experienced nearly 3 times standard gravity, empowering Vexthorn to routinely treat most other species as if they were particularly fragile furnishings. Cassidy Morgan stood in the food distribution line, tray in hand, minding her own affairs. She was new, only 3 weeks into the semester, part of the human integration program that the Galactic Council had enacted despite substantial opposition. No one had quite figured out what to make of humans yet. They appeared inoffensive enough, delicate skin, no inherent armor, no notable claws or fangs, bipedal, which was fairly common. They hailed from a backwater planet named Earth, recently designated a protected Deathworld, though everyone suspected this was a politically motivated classification inflation to secure them a seat at the table. The dispute began over something trivial, as it always does. Vexthorn desired the final serving of a confection called chocolate cake, apparently a human delicacy that the kitchen staff had prepared as a cultural concession. Cassidy, however, had reached it first. Words were exchanged. Vexthorn, surrounded by his usual retinue of sycophants and hangers-on, evidently felt his reputation necessitated defense. Consequently, he shoved her, not forcefully by his standards, merely a casual backhand to the shoulder. It was the kind of dismissive gesture he had employed on dozens of other students who failed to comprehend their standing in the social order. A move that conveyed, "I am larger, I am more powerful, and you will yield." Cassidy did not yield. She slowly turned and regarded him, truly regarded him. Her countenance remained impassive. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood there, clutching her tray with the chocolate cake she had legitimately claimed. And Vexthorn, misinterpreting this as defiance rather than the caution it genuinely was, committed his second error. He extended his primary manipulator, intending to physically remove her from his path. His appendage connected with the side of her head. The reverberation echoed through the cafeteria, a solid thwack that caused everyone within 20 feet to cease eating, conversing, and even breathing. 300 students from 40 diverse species froze, anticipating the inevitable outcome. The fragile human would collapse. Medical personnel would be summoned. An incident report would be filed. Vexthorn's family would make some contributions. Life would persist. Cassidy's head shifted approximately 4 degrees to the left from the impact. Then she straightened, rotated her neck once, then twice, and fixed her gaze upon Vexthorn. She smiled. It was not a benevolent smile. For the first time in his privileged, gravity-augmented existence, Vexthorn felt an unfamiliar sensation slither up his spine. His manipulator throbbed, truly throbbed. He looked down at it, bewildered, and observed the primary joint already beginning to swell. Cassidy took a bite of her chocolate cake, chewed deliberately, and swallowed before speaking. "You're going to want to have that examined," she stated, her voice carrying across the now silent cafeteria. "Striking bone tends to be painful, even for someone as formidable as you apparently believe yourself to be." Then she departed, leaving Vexthorn standing there, cradling his rapidly swelling appendage, while 300 pairs of eyes from 40 species observed his face transition through confusion, pain, and the dawning realization that he had just committed a catastrophic error in judgment. The silence lasted precisely 5 more seconds before the cafeteria erupted into a cacophony of sound. Security Chief Brontel reached the sub-level 9 cafeteria within 90 seconds of the alert. An impressive feat, considering his 6 legs and the turboshaft's ongoing maintenance. He was a kite, built low and wide, possessing sensory organs capable of detecting emotional pheromones from 3 corridors away. At this moment, those organs communicated that the cafeteria was thoroughly saturated with panic, excitement, and a troubling degree of vengeful satisfaction. All right, everyone. Return to your meals. Nothing to observe here," he declared, his translation collar rendering his clicking speech into flat, Galactic standard. This, however, was a falsehood. There was undeniably something to observe. Specifically, Vexthorn Salakite, seated at the medical station table, his manipulator appendage swollen to twice its normal size, while his retinue orbited him like solicitous satellites. "She assaulted me!" Vexthorn was exclaiming, his voice taut with anguish and indignation. "A human! She struck me!" Brontal accessed the security footage on his wrist display. He watched it once, twice, a third time, as his brain resisted processing what his sensory organs were clearly conveying. He magnified the impact point, enhanced the audio, and verified the timestamp to ensure this wasn't some student prank involving edited video. Nope. Vexthorn had definitively initiated contact, and the human had definitively walked away without so much as a stumble. "You will want to revise that statement," Brontel stated slowly. "What I am witnessing here is you initiating physical contact with another student, twice." The throng of students had not dispersed, rather, it had expanded. Pippera, one of Vexthorn's regular associates, a slender Barthy with exceptional pattern recognition, was furiously scrolling through her data pad. Her face, or what passed for it, had blanched. "Oh no," she whispered. "Oh no, no, no." "What?" demanded Krilshan, another member of Vexthorn's group. "I researched Earth." "The actual classification files, not the summary we received during orientation." Pippera's voice ascended by half an octave. "It's a Class 12 Deathworld! Class 12!" The briefing packet stated, "Class 7. Someone made a typo. Or they lied. Or, oh, ancestors preserve us, they rounded down for political reasons." The surrounding students began pulling up their own datapads, and the cafeteria filled with the sound of frantic searching and increasingly horrified revelations. Humans had been admitted to Kathazak Station Academy as part of the Galactic Council's latest diversity initiative, pushed through by the diplomatic corps over the objections of, well, virtually everyone employed in education. The humans desired a seat at the principal table. They wished for their offspring to be educated alongside the elite of galactic society. They possessed resources, trade commodities, and a surprising amount of influence for a species that had only achieved faster-than-light travel 40 years prior. The compromise had been straightforward. Admit a small number of human students, observe, evaluate, and determine if they could manage the rigorous academic environment without, perishing or instigating an interstellar incident. No one had bothered to conduct a profound analysis of human physiology. Why would they? Preliminary scans depicted them as soft, fleshy, vulnerable, standard carbon-based life forms. They required approximately 1 standard gravity, breathed oxygen, and consumed organic matter. Boring, harmless. The Salakites, by contrast, were universally recognized as high-gravity world specialists. Their offspring were born into environments nearly twice standard gravity and found it relaxing. By adolescence, they could function comfortably in conditions that would reduce most species to their constituent molecules. They were resilient, they were potent, and they knew it. Vexthorn stemmed from ancient wealth, and even more ancient arrogance. His family controlled significant mining interests across 4 systems. They contributed generously to the Academy. They anticipated, quite reasonably from their perspective, that their son would be treated with appropriate respect, that he would socially and physically dominate, as was his birthright. That very birthright was currently throbbing in sync with his circulatory system, while a medical drone scanned it and emitted disapproving beeping sounds. Headmaster Quilks received the incident notification amidst a virtual conference with the Board of Governors. He was a Threnal, a species renowned for its diplomatic acumen and its capacity to foresee 12 moves ahead in any political scenario. At this particular moment, he could discern precisely 0 favorable outcomes from the information his datapad was conveying. "Forgive me," he addressed the board members, his 4 eyes cycling rapidly through colors, betraying intense stress. "We have an emergency," he stated, having just reviewed the preliminary report and the security footage transcript. His primary manipulators then covered his face, and he emitted a sound the translator rendered as profound dismay with undertones of existential dread. "Fetch me every available document on human physiology," he instructed his assistant. "The authentic files, not the summarized orientation, and locate that human student before this escalates into a full diplomatic incident." His assistant, Tessa, a highly capable young Frillion, nodded swiftly. "Sir, should we notify the Sulukit family?" Gil's eyes shifted to a deep purple. "Oh, they will undoubtedly contact us, likely within the next 10 minutes. Prepare my communication console with full shielding. This is going to be loud." Meanwhile, in the cafeteria, Cassidy Morgan had settled into a quiet corner, savoring her last bites of chocolate cake. Her datapad lay open, displaying what appeared to be assignments for Xenobiology 301. She seemed entirely oblivious to the commotion she had inadvertently caused. Bronal approached cautiously, his sensory organs registering no fear, aggression, or heightened emotional state from her whatsoever. "Miss Morgan," he began. "I require you to accompany me." She looked up, swallowed her final morsel of cake, and nodded. "Certainly. Am I in trouble?" "That," Bronal replied slowly, "is an excellent question. I genuinely do not know yet." The medical bay on level 4 was designed to accommodate every major biological classification in the known galaxy. It boasted isolation chambers, regeneration tanks, biochemical synthesizers, and one exceedingly weary Dr. Helen, who had been mere hours from the end of her shift when the alert arrived. Dr. Helen, a Prixian, possessed exceptional fine motor control, 6 specialized sensory organs, and absolutely no tolerance for foolishness. Having served at the Academy for 12 years, she had witnessed every conceivable type of student injury. Sports accidents, lab explosions, and that one regrettable incident involving a zero-gravity mating ritual that no one dared speak of anymore. This, however, is unprecedented. "Let me ensure I understand correctly," she articulated, scanning Vexthorn's swollen appendage with her apparatus. "You struck this human student with your primary manipulator." "At approximately 40% of my full strength. I barely touched her," Vexthorn protested, though his voice cracked slightly. The pain medication offered some relief, but not enough. "It was nothing, a mere tap. She should have moved." Aha. Dr. Helen displayed the scan results on her screen, her 6 sensory organs focusing intently on the data, then refocusing. She then emitted a whistling sound, her species indicator of profound confusion. "Your primary metacarpal joint is fractured. The secondary support structure is cracked in 3 places. You have severe tissue damage, consistent with high-velocity impact against a dense, unyielding surface." "That is impossible," Vexthorn stated flatly. "I am Salakit. Our bone structure can endure 12 times standard gravitational pressure. Our striking force is measured in thousands of pressure units." "She is human. They are soft. Everyone knows this." "Everyone," Dr. Helen said slowly, "appears to have been operating with incorrect data." She pulled up Cassidy's scan on an adjacent display. The human sat on the examination platform, legs dangling slightly, appearing as unconcerned as someone awaiting public transport. Dr. Helen had run every diagnostic she could conceive of. Twice. "Miss Morgan," she began cautiously, "you have a mild contusion on the left temporal region, approximately 2 centimeters in diameter. Minor capillary damage, no concussion, no structural damage, no neural trauma." She paused. "How are you feeling?" "Fine," Cassidy responded. "A little annoyed I dropped my cake during the walk over here. That was the last piece." "You dropped your cake?" Dr. Helen repeated the words as if they belonged to a language she had never encountered. "You were struck by a Salakit with enough force to fracture his own appendage, and you are concerned about cake?" "It was really good cake." Vexthorn stared at her, truly stared. The pain medication blurred everything slightly, but even through the chemical haze, his brain wrestled with something utterly illogical, incomprehensible. He had hit her. He had felt the impact. She should be in a regeneration tank, not casually lamenting dessert. "What are you?" he managed, his voice smaller than intended. Cassidy tilted her head, considering the question. "Human exchange student. Xenobiology major. Currently quite hungry because someone made me miss dinner." Security Chief Bronal, who had been quietly reviewing footage and incident reports in the corner, cleared his throat. "Dr. Helen, can you explain what transpired here in terms comprehensible to those of us without medical degrees?" Dr. Helen brought up a comparative analysis on the main display. Salakit's skeletal structure, though impressive, is optimized for their home environment. High gravity, yes, but within predictable parameters. Their bones are dense, their muscles powerful, but they evolved in a stable environment with consistent physical laws. She highlighted Vexthorn's scan. When this student struck Miss Morgan, he anticipated her skull to possess approximately the density and malleability of, say, a Varanthe or Frillian cranial structure. Something that would absorb impact, deform slightly, and allow for force distribution. She then displayed Cassidy's skull scan. Even to non-medical personnel, the discrepancy was glaring. The bone density was absurd. The structural integrity resembled armored vehicles, not organic life forms. Human skeletal structure evolved on a death world, with highly variable and often extreme environmental pressures. Their bones are not merely dense, they are engineered through millions of years of evolution to withstand catastrophic impact, rapid acceleration, and persistent high-stress loading. Miss Morgan's skull did not deform. It did not flex. It did not yield at all. Dr. Helen zoomed in on the impact point. When Vexthorn struck her, it was functionally equivalent to striking a Durasteel bulkhead with his bare manipulator at speed. The room fell into a profound silence. "But she is so small," Vexthorn murmured weakly. "She looks fragile." "Yes, well, apparently looking fragile and being fragile are two entirely distinct concepts." "Doctor," Helen closed the displays. "Your species evolved to handle high gravity. Miss Morgan's species evolved to survive high gravity, extreme temperature fluctuations, aggressive megafauna, pandemic-level diseases, and, according to this file I just pulled up, something called Australian wildlife, which I am not going to contemplate too deeply, because it is giving me anxiety." "But the orientation material said humans were Class 7, Pippa's voice interjected from the doorway. She had followed them to medical, her datapad clutched in her manipulators. "Class 7 is manageable. Class 7 is normal-ish." "The orientation materials," Bronell said grimly, pulling up his own datapad, "contained what we now believe was either a clerical error or a deliberate political softening of the facts. Earth is designated as a Class 12 death world." "Class 12?" Pippa gasped. "That places it in the same category as Vrax Prime, which is actively volcanic, and Cruchar, where the atmosphere is mildly acidic and it rains metal shards." Cassidy raised her hand slightly. "To be fair, Earth isn't that bad. I mean, yes, we have earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, tsunamis, wildfires, floods, droughts, blizzards, venomous everything, and predators that think humans are crunchy and good with ketchup. But you get used to it." "You get used to it?" Vexthorn repeated numbly. "Sure. I mean, humans are pretty adaptable. It's kind of our thing," she shrugged. "We're not the strongest species, not the fastest, not the smartest, probably, but we are really, really good at not dying when everything is trying to kill us, which, on Earth, everything is, constantly. It builds character." Dr. Helen made a note on her datapad. "I am going to need to completely revise the human medical protocols and possibly requisition stronger pain medication for everyone else when they realize what humans actually are." Vexthorn looked at his swollen, fractured appendage, then at Cassidy, who was checking her own datapad for messages, then back at his appendage. "I need to contact my family," he said quietly. "Yes," Bronell agreed. "Yes, you do, because this is going to get complicated." The student network at Tristation Academy could disseminate information faster than a quantum data burst. By the time Vexthorn was released from medical, his appendage, encased in a regenerative cast and a prescription for heavy-duty pain suppressants, every student in the facility, knew what had transpired. Most had viewed the footage. All had opinions. The Varanthi students, typically confident in their intellectual superiority, huddled in the library, running calculations. Hippariska had become an unofficial spokesperson, her datapad connected to the main display as a crowd gathered. "Okay, so Earth's gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared," she announced, her manipulators flying across her pad. "That's almost exactly one standard galactic unit, which is why nobody thought twice about it. But look at this." She pulled up a comparative chart. Our homeworld, Varath, 0.7 standard. Frill, 0.6. The Keet homeworld runs at 0.85. Even the Salakit, whom everyone considers these unstoppable juggernauts, evolved on a world with 2.7 standard gravity. "So what?" Kroshan said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "1 standard gravity is normal. That's the baseline." "That's the baseline we use for station construction, you absolute fool," Hippariska snapped. "The value on the chart represents the mathematical average across the species within the Council, yet it's far from typical for most of us. Humans, for instance, don't conform to this average. They consistently operate at a full unit. Their entire evolutionary journey, from birth, has been shaped under that specific pressure," she explained, pulling up another chart. This new display showcased Earth's rotation, axial tilt, and orbital mechanics, accompanied by her narration. And it gets even more fascinating. Their homeworld experiences extreme axial tilt, leading to dramatic seasonal variations and temperature fluctuations of 40 degrees or more. Their atmosphere boasts oxygen levels that would be lethal to half the species present here if sustained over time. They contend with weather patterns that routinely generate wind speeds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. And their solution? Construct buildings and grumble about the forecast. A Frillian student named Quanto delicately raised a manipulator. "Surely the Deathworld classification applies to the environment, not its inhabitants. A dangerous planet doesn't necessarily imply a dangerous species." Pirisa fixed him with a gaze. "The species evolved on that planet. They are sculpted by it. Every single aspect of their biology is optimized for survival there. Their bone density, muscle fiber composition, cardiovascular system, immune response, and even their brain chemistry, which apparently leads them to believe that charging at predators with sharpened sticks is a viable survival tactic." She continued to scroll through additional data. "Do you know what the dominant predator on Earth was for the majority of its evolutionary history? Them. Humans. They are the apex predators of a Class 12 Deathworld. Ponder that for a moment." This revelation resonated throughout the academy. In dormitories, common areas, and study halls, students experienced the same epiphany. Humans were not merely guests, nor were they charity cases admitted for political expediency. They were survivors of an environment that would decimate most galactic species within a single solar rotation. Memes began to proliferate almost immediately. Someone had embellished the cafeteria footage with dramatic music and slow-motion effects, which then spread throughout the student network, captioned, "When you forget to check the spec sheet." Another meme featured Cassidy's utterly impassive expression overlaid with the text, "Oh no. Anyway." A third presented a comparative chart of skull density measurements, accompanied by progressively alarmed reactions from various species. The faculty's response, though more measured, was no less disconcerted. Professor Kelvin, an advanced physics instructor, presented Earth's specifications during his lecture and spent 40 minutes re-evaluating force equations as his students watched in captivated horror. "If we assume an average human mass of 70 kilograms," he stated, inscribing equations on the display board, "and consistent exposure to 9.8 meters per second squared throughout their development, their musculoskeletal system is under constant load, equivalent to what most of us experience during high-stress physical activity. Constantly. Every moment of every day, their bodies perceive that as a resting state." A student tentatively raised a tentacle. "Professor, does that imply that when they are aboard this station, at one standard gravity, they are effectively operating at a reduced weight?" Professor Kelvin's scales shifted to a pale hue, signifying distress. Yes, it does. They are carrying approximately 15 to 20% less effective mass than their bodies are calibrated for, meaning their strength-to-weight ratio here is, ancestors, significantly higher than on their homeworld. "So Cassidy wasn't even trying," someone whispered from the back. "Miss Morgan," Professor Kelvin corrected absently, still engrossed in his calculations, "was simply standing still and allowing physics to take its course." Bexthorne had struck an object with greater density and structural integrity than his own manipulator could withstand, making the outcome inevitable. Meanwhile, in Headmaster Quillrex's office, the communication console had been incessantly flashing for 2 hours. The Salaket family had indeed made contact, loudly and repeatedly, with increasing degrees of what the translator courteously rendered as vigorous disagreement. Matriarch Valkit's image dominated the holo display as she declared, "My son is the victim here." She was an imposing figure, even by Salaket standards, nearly 9 feet tall, adorned in ceremonial armor that likely surpassed the cost of the entire medical bay. "He was assaulted by this human. We demand her immediate expulsion and full restitution for damages." Quillrex, who had by then reviewed the security footage approximately 30 times, stifled the urge to terminate the call. "Matriarch, with all due respect, your son initiated physical contact. The footage is exceptionally clear on this point." "He barely touched her," she retorted. "He struck her with sufficient force to fracture his own appendage." Quillrex brought up the medical reports. "Dr. Helen's analysis is comprehensive. Your son attacked another student. That student defended herself by, and I'm quoting the report here, existing in proximity to his fist." "This is outrageous. The Salakate have been members of the Galactic Council for 300 years. We have standing. We have a reputation. We will not be humiliated by some upstart species from a backwater system." "The backwater system in question," Quillrex said, his voice tinged with an edge, "is a Class 12 Deathworld that produces sentient persistence hunters with skeletal structures that make Durasteel seem fragile. Perhaps your reputation should include not attacking them unprovoked." The matriarch's expression cycled through several colors. "You are defending this human over my son?" "I am defending reality over convenient assumptions. Your son made an error, a significant one. The Academy will, of course, provide full medical support for his recovery. However, there will be consequences for initiating violence against another student." "We donate significantly to this institution." "Yes, you do, and we appreciate it. But money does not alter physics, Matriarch. Your son punched a human. He lost. Those are the facts." The call disconnected, with what the system logged as excessive force to communication controls. Quillrex slumped in his chair and pulled up the enrollment files for the other human students. 6 more were scattered across various programs. All of them walked around with the bone density of armored personnel carriers, the muscle efficiency of high-performance machinery, and the casual durability of a species that found natural selection to be an enjoyable challenge. "We are going to need new insurance policies," he told Tessica, "and possibly warning signs. Do we have warning signs for humans?" "No, sir." "Get some made. Something tasteful, perhaps." "Caution! Deathworld species. Do not strike. Make sure it's in multiple languages." On the student network, someone had initiated a mock betting pool for the next human-related incident. The odds on another Salakir tries something stupid were surprisingly low. The odds on humans win interspecies athletics competition without trying were climbing rapidly. In the cafeteria, at the very table where the incident had transpired, Cassidy sat with her datapad, engrossed in homework, completely oblivious that she had fundamentally altered the social dynamics of the most prestigious academy in known space by doing nothing more complex than possessing a skull. The disciplinary hearing convened in the Grand Forum on Level 2, a space meticulously designed to accommodate multiple species with diverse atmospheric and gravitational preferences. The adjudication panel comprised 7 members, representing the major student demographics, with Headmaster Quillrex presiding. The gallery was packed. Apparently, nothing drew a crowd quite like witnessing privilege clash with consequences. Vexthorn occupied the respondents' table, his appendage still encased in its regenerative cast, flanked by 2 legal representatives hired by his family. These Caraxian barristers were renowned for their aggressive defense strategies and a win record that unnerved most prosecutors. They exuded confidence, expense, and readiness for battle. Cassidy sat alone at the complainants' table, dressed in the same casual station clothes she had worn in the cafeteria. She held a single datapad and a drink container that, according to its label, contained something called coffee. She appeared as though she would rather be virtually anywhere else. "This hearing will come to order," Quillrex announced, his translation caller projecting his voice across the forum. "We are here to address the incident that occurred in the Sub-Level 9 cafeteria during the 3rd meal rotation 4 days ago. The respondent, Vexthorn Salaket, stands accused of initiating unprovoked physical violence against fellow student Cassidy Morgan. How does the respondent plead?" The lead barrister rose, gesturing dramatically with all 4 of his arm appendages. "Not guilty, Headmaster. My client maintains that this was a mutual altercation resulting from escalating tensions. Furthermore, we argue that my client is the injured party and deserves compensation for medical expenses and emotional trauma." A ripple went through the gallery. Someone made a noise that the translators struggled with, finally settling on derisive laughter. "Very well. Present your evidence." Quillrex settled back in his chair. This was going to be painful. The barristers presented their case. They produced testimonies from Vexthorn's friends, all of whom carefully described the cafeteria argument as mutual and heated. They brought up Cassidy's recent arrival at the academy, suggesting cultural misunderstandings. They emphasized Vexthorn's injuries, displaying medical scans of the fractures in elaborate detail. "My client," the lead barrister declared, "is a model student from a respected family. He has never been involved in any prior disciplinary actions. This human, by contrast, has been at the academy for mere weeks. Who is more credible here?" Security Chief Brontal stood, his 6 legs clicking against the floor as he approached the central display. "If I may, Headmaster." "Proceed." Bronile displayed the security footage, raw and uncut, featuring audio and views from 3 distinct cameras, revealing the actual events. The assembly watched in silence as Vexthorn casually backhanded Cassidy. They observed her stillness, then his second attempt to strike, connecting with her head. Immediately he recoiled, clutching his hand, while Cassidy calmly took a bite of cake and departed. I noted 2 instances of Vexthoran initiating physical contact, Brontal stated. 0 instances of Cassidy Morgan responding with aggression. She did not retaliate, utter threats, or even raise her voice. She simply existed, and his appendage fractured against her cranium. This was not a mutual confrontation. This was an assault met with immediate karmic repercussions. The barristers huddled, their whispers urgent, their previous confidence visibly diminished. "We wish to summon the complainant to testify," the lead barrister declared, a note of desperation now in his voice. Cassidy rose and proceeded to the testimony platform, appearing not anxious, but rather disengaged. "Miss Morgan," the barrister began, "is it true that you and my client had been arguing before this incident?" "Yes." "And is it accurate to say that tensions were high?" "I mean, he seemed quite agitated about cake. I was simply hungry." "But you refused to yield when he requested the item." "Requested?" Cassidy repeated, as if savoring the word. He demanded. I had reached the cake first. First come, first served strikes me as a fairly universal principle. Was I mistaken? The barrister shifted his approach. My client belongs to a species renowned for their strength and resilience. Surely you understood that a physical confrontation with a sulkite would be hazardous. Oh, I understood perfectly, Cassidy affirmed, taking a sip of her coffee. Which is precisely why I did not strike him back. That would have been dangerous for him. You are asserting that you could have harmed my client. I am asserting that I had no desire to send anyone to the regeneration tank over chocolate cake, which, for the record, was exceptionally good chocolate cake. So I comprehend the temptation. But no, I was not going to escalate to genuine violence over dessert. I merely stood there. He was the one who decided my face was an ideal striking surface. And you anticipate this panel will believe that you, a human, could harm a sulkite? Cassidy set down her coffee. Do you desire a demonstration? Because I can tap his cast and show you exactly how much pressure is necessary to make him regret his life choices once more. Vexthorn noticeably flinched, the gallery observed. That will not be necessary, Quillrex interjected swiftly. Miss Morgan, can you elucidate why you were unharmed by an impact that fractured Vextorin's appendage? Certainly. Basic physics and evolutionary biology. I originate from Earth. Earth possesses one standard gravity, which, it appears, is higher than what most of you are accustomed to. Our bones are dense out of necessity. Our skulls are particularly dense because our brains are vital, and evolution deemed encasing them in what is essentially organic armor a sound investment. She shrugged. He struck me hard enough to injure himself, not hard enough to injure me. That is not my fault. Panel member Thrixol, a Varanthi biologist, leaned forward. Miss Morgan, for the record, could you clarify Earth's actual Deathworld classification? Class 12. Although, honestly, I find the classification system a bit melodramatic. Yes, Earth presents certain challenges. Active tectonics, dynamic weather, biodiversity that includes numerous creatures with teeth, venom, and unpleasant dispositions. But humans adapted. We excel at that. What kind of challenges are we discussing? Another panel member inquired. Cassidy pondered. Well, we have megafauna that can weigh several tons and consider humans food. We have weather systems capable of leveling entire cities. We have seismic events that reshape geography. We have microscopic organisms that can kill us in horrific ways. So our immune systems are essentially in perpetual warfare. Oh, And we have mosquitoes, which account for more human deaths annually than any other animal, and are somehow still not extinct, which should indicate something about the tenacity of life on Earth. The gallery had grown profoundly quiet. "And you merely live there routinely?" Thrix asked. "I mean, it is home. You become accustomed to it. Check the weather forecast. Get vaccinated. Avoid petting the wildlife. Standard operating procedure." At the respondents' table, the barristers were frantically scrolling through datapads, perusing Class 12 Deathworld specifications with expressions of escalating dread. Another human student, seated in the gallery, raised his hand. "May I add something?" Quillrex granted permission. The student rose. "My name is James Chen, also human, also from Earth. I simply wish to point out that Cassidy is being exceedingly modest. Humans don't merely survive on Earth. We ascend to the apex of the food chain through persistence, hunting, tool use, and spite. We are not the largest, not the swiftest, not the strongest in absolute terms. But we do not surrender, we do not cease, and we remember. Do you know what our ancestors did when they sought to hunt something larger and faster than themselves? They pursued it for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. Then they consumed it. That is human strategy. That is who we are." Another human student spoke up, a woman named Rachel Torres. "Also, we domesticated wolves. We transformed apex predators into pets through selective breeding and camaraderie. We accomplished this while simultaneously hunting mammoth-sized creatures with rocks attached to sticks." Just for context. The panel members exchanged glances. Several had altered their skin coloration, signaling distress. Quinn cleared his throat. "Thank you for that illuminating context. Does the defense have anything further to add?" The barristers conferred briefly. "No, Headmaster. We rest our case." Everyone understood the implication. They possessed nothing. No defense, no counter-argument. Only a client who had struck a human and learned a costly lesson about assumptions. The verdict was delivered 48 hours later, a record time for the Academy's disciplinary system. Typically, such matters would linger for weeks as various parties negotiated and postured. Not this time. The evidence was too unequivocal, the physics too straightforward, and frankly, no one desired to prolong the embarrassment. Vexthorn received a formal reprimand on his permanent academic record, a 2-week suspension, mandatory enrollment in a conflict resolution seminar, and 100 hours of community service in the very cafeteria he had disrupted. He was also mandated to issue a public apology to Cassidy Morgan, delivered in the same grand forum where the hearing had transpired. The apology was brief, painful, and utterly devoid of the casual arrogance Vexthorn had previously worn like a second skin. He stood at the podium, his cast still on his appendage, and read from a prepared statement that his barristers had almost certainly drafted for him. "I made assumptions based on incomplete information," he stated, his voice barely audible across the forum. "I initiated violence against another student. I was mistaken. I apologize to Cassidy Morgan and to the Academy community for my actions." Cassidy, seated in the front row because she was apparently required to attend, nodded once. "Apology accepted. Do not do it again." The true penalty, however, was not official. It was social. Vexthorn's family, mortified by the galactic attention the incident had garnered, quietly reduced their public profile at the Academy. His former entourage dispersed, unwilling to associate with someone who had become a living meme. He now ate lunch alone, at tables far from the human students, and kept his head averted. Papriska, who had immediately distanced herself after retrieving Earth's classification data, later admitted she felt sympathy for him. "He was an arrogant fool," she told anyone who would listen. "But he genuinely didn't know. None of us did." The Academy failed to provide accurate information, and he paid the price for institutional incompetence. She was not mistaken. 3 days after the verdict, Headmaster Quinns announced sweeping policy changes. First, all species classification data in orientation materials would be audited and corrected. No more rounding, no more political soft-peddling of facts. If a species originated from a Class 12 Deathworld, students would be informed up front. Second, a new mandatory course was added to the curriculum: Deathworld Species and Survival Adaptations. It would cover not just humans, but the handful of other species from extreme environments who had been similarly underestimated over the years. Professor Kelvin was tasked with leading it, despite his protest that he taught physics, not xenobiology. "Physics is why their bones do not break," Quillrex informed him. "Physics is precisely what you need to teach." Third, and perhaps most significantly, the Academy established a formal exchange program for cultural education. Human students would present about Earth. Other Deathworld species would share their experiences. The objective was understanding. The hope was fewer incidents of students punching each other and discovering uncomfortable truths about comparative anatomy. Cassidy Morgan became an accidental celebrity. She couldn't traverse a corridor without students staring, pointing, or occasionally requesting autographs. The student network had transformed her into a legend. There were compilation videos of every appearance on security footage, usually just walking to class or studying in the library, accompanied by dramatic narration about Deathworld biology. She despised it. "I just want to study xenobiology," she confided to James Chen over lunch one day, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "I didn't come here to be famous for having a skull. Everyone has a skull. Mine just happens to be denser, because my ancestors lived somewhere with actual gravity and predators that found bipedal apes delicious." "You could lean into it," James suggested. "Start a vlog." Humans elucidate Earth. They've capitalized on both apprehension and allure. "Absolutely not," she thought. "That sounds utterly draining." She prodded her sustenance, a type of Veranthe grain concoction, nourishing yet unappetizing. "I yearn for Earth cuisine," she mused. "Authentic Earth food, rich with spices that would likely incapacitate half the student body here. The capsaicin compound." "The capsaicin compound," she concurred. "I endeavored to elucidate to my Frillian housemate why humans consume peppers, which inflict chemical burns inside our mouths, purely for amusement." Her housemate's expression suggested I had admitted to recreational self-harm. "Well, technically it does build character." The other human students had adapted dissimilarly. Rachel Torres had inaugurated a combat sports club, imparting knowledge of human martial arts to inquisitive extraterrestrials. The initial session drew 40 students. The subsequent session dwindled to 12, when participants realized that human pliability and joint articulation were, to species encased in exoskeletons, frankly terrifying. James had joined the Astrophysics Research Collective, and frequently, albeit unintentionally, intimidated his lab partners by effortlessly lifting apparatuses that typically necessitated the combined effort of 3 individuals. For their part, the alien students were collectively re-evaluating their comprehension of the cosmos. Humans were not merely guests. They were not objects of charity. They were survivors from a world that had striven to extinguish them for millions of years, and they had prevailed. Some species found this unnerving. The Frillians, delicate and averse to conflict, maintained a wide berth from human students in the hallways. Others found it captivating. The Kephits, who valued resilience, began extending invitations to humans for their social gatherings, and some, like Piparisa, found it enlightening. "I was mistaken about humans," she declared during a study session, her manipulators rapidly traversing her data pad as she collated notes for a presentation. "We all were. We perceived soft skin and inferred frailty. We failed to consider that soft skin might be an asset, not a defect. Flexibility, adaptability, the capacity to recuperate swiftly from injuries that would permanently impair species with rigid exoskeletons." She directed her gaze at Cassidy, who was immersed in homework at the same table. "You are not delicate. You are optimized for an alternative mode of survival." Cassidy momentarily lifted her head from her xenobiology notes. "That is probably the most gracious comment anyone has made about humans since our arrival. Typically, it's just variations on terrifying or potentially hazardous." "You embody those qualities too," Piparisa remarked cheerfully, though in an instructive manner. 6 weeks following the incident, Cassidy finally re-established her usual routine. The intense scrutiny had diminished. The hushed conversations had mostly ceased. She could now partake in lunch without someone requesting a description of Earth's most perilous predators or an explanation of humanity's survival prior to modern medicine. She sat in the cafeteria at the identical table where the whole affair had commenced, engaged with her datapad. A slice of chocolate cake rested on her tray. She had reached it first, and this time, no one challenged her claim. Across the room, Vexthorn was concluding his community service shift, busying himself with cleaning tables and gathering trays. He briefly glanced in her direction, then quickly averted his gaze. Cassidy remained oblivious. She was too engrossed in her study of cellular adaptation in silicon-based life forms, completely absorbed in the fundamental reason for her presence at Cathosic Station Academy: to acquire knowledge, to research, to comprehend the astonishing diversity of life in the galaxy, and, occasionally it seemed, to impart to everyone else a lesson about preconceived notions, physics, and the ill-advised nature of antagonizing a species that had evolved by eluding meteor strikes and grappling with predators for recreation. But primarily, the pursuit of knowledge, that was the significant aspect. Perhaps the true inquiry isn't why humans are so difficult to break. Perhaps the actual question is why, after enduring a world that relentlessly sought to extinguish them, they consistently opt for self-control over fury. If strength were solely defined by aggression, Earth would not have persisted for such an extended period. Therefore, consider this. Would your confidence lie with a species capable of conflict, or one that consciously abstains?